Welcome to the Business Trendsetter podcast, where we talk about trends and how to use them to grow your business. My name is Manny Turan.
And I'm Adam Hartung.
And we are Spark Partners. We talk about growth, and to learn about how to grow your business, go to our website at sparkpartners.com. Dive into our masses and masses of content. Take a look around you, and let's get started, Adam. So I have a really cool pair of sunglasses here, Adam, that I bought about a month ago. These are designer brand. I got them at a one of these off-brand stores, like I think it was Burlington or Ross or whatever. I like to go in there every once in a while. And these cost me $14. Now, if you think about the supply chain required to make these high, I mean, they're nice glasses. They have the nice, coating on them, the anti-reflective coating. I mean, they're nice. And for $15, I can't go wrong. The reason I'm able to buy these for $15 is because the supply chain these were made, of course, in China, was very robust and is very robust, but there's a couple of wrinkles. So I wanted to kind of pull the grenade here on a conversation regarding globalization that has been baking in the oven here for a while, and now that we're dealing with the Central European war, Ukraine war, it's causing people to look left and right, up and down. Is my supply chain stable? Should I continue buying from here or from there? And so I want to bring that to the conversation, and I wanted to open it up with the visit that, of course, Nixon made to China back in '72. That opened up really the conversation with the once isolated country. And the fact of the matter is, we talked about earlier, Adam, the size and scope of the Chinese economy is to be attributed in the majority by the U.S.'s demand for cheap products. So take it away.
Well, I think you're right. A lot of people forget that when we opened up trade with China, I think there was some hope that we would sell things in China. I remember what was called Navistar. I think it may be dead now, but before it was Navistar, it was International Harvester. They wanted to sell tractors in China, and so they were a big proponent of making relations with China good and setting business. But the amount of stuff we sold to China over the 40 years hasn't amounted to much, and certainly we bought an awful lot from them, including those sunglasses that you recently picked up. And, we changed the world. We really did. American business has had as much to do with changing the world as wars for many, many years. We imported a ton of stuff from Japan after World War II. We put the Japanese economy back into play, back into business. As you said, we've brought a lot of stuff in from China. We've brought a lot of stuff in from Brazil. A lot of people don't realize almost all of the hamburger meat that's sold at McDonald's is raised in Brazil. Almost all of it. So a lot of agricultural products are imported from there. We get a lot of beef from Chile, as well as what we get from the United States, domestic production. And India. India was this country where in my generation, they used to say, "Clean up your plate, son, because there's starving people in India." There are certainly people that are bad off in India, but India is not longer that starving country that we portrayed it to be in the 1950s and 1960s, all due to international trade. And so it's a megatrend, just like demographics has been a megatrend, just like environmental awareness is a megatrend that we've been talking about, and some length. Globalization for 2 decades has been a very serious megatrend. But this is why it's so important that we realize that our scenario planning is not a once-a-year exercise, right? A lot of people get into this mode of strategic planning, scenario planning. Oh, we do that once a year at some offsite, and we kind of put it in a shelf and let it go. Because what we're seeing right now is the reason that scenario planning has to be a living exercise, something that you revisit on a regular basis. Now that, we had 2 big events. The first one was the pandemic, like you mentioned, okay? And so in the pandemic, we saw the supply chains tighten up, problems with supply chains, problems getting things delivered. And that problem didn't really ever go away. It just got better. But we certainly have had ongoing issues about products not being available, products tied up on ships. At one point, they were talking about how many ships were offshore in Long Beach. Could we get that
I remember those
material
days
in here for Christmas? Remember that?
Yeah.
People started saying, hey, do we really want to do business this way? Is this really the best way, or should we shorten up these supply chains and make them a little closer to home? Then, boom, Russia invades Ukraine. And now all of a sudden, trust just evaporates, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago, right? Can I really trust my trading partners? Because if Moscow can decide that it's going to invade the Ukraine and start a war, what's to stop China from invading Taiwan, starting a war? Or China's been building islands, defense islands, off in the South China Sea now for 25 years. They could turn those into naval bases or Air Force bases very easily. Why? So that they could interfere with trade practices in the Philippines, trade practices in Japan, trade practices in Vietnam. So what this invasion has done is it said, hey, this megatrend is probably not going to be going forward the way it was. So our scenario planning, which for years said, hey, look, we'll go source this stuff from a foreign country. Hey, we'll sell some stuff in a foreign country. Globalization is here to stay. Open borders are here to stay for trade. For trade. I meant that term in terms of trade, not immigration. But we've been just very common and nonchalant about it. Now it's time to change those scenarios. Now we have to sit back and say, wait a minute. We now see that there's more risk in globalization than there was 10 years ago. And with more risk, we got to think through what those implications mean. And so I think we'll spend a little time talking about that today, right? What are some of the implications of this on America? So let's just take, for example, all right, I've decided that globalization is now no longer what it was, so I need to bring more of my production back to the United States. So let's make those sunglasses of yours in the United States, Manny. Yeah. Well, first of all, where am I going to build the plant?
Well, right?
We haven't been doing manufacturing for 20 years here. We've been offshoring. What do we do for the plant?
Well, we'll have to build it in some place that has the right people that can operate the machinery that operates the injection molding machines and also has a low-cost base. Good luck with that one.
Oh, okay. So when did you go to Oz? I mean that, man. You're lucky you live in Arizona. You're one of the 48 states that isn't suffering from a demographic decline, okay? You and the folks in Nevada have people immigrating into your states at a rate that's keeping your property prices up, keeping your taxes low, keeping your infrastructure solid. That's great for you. The other 48 states, all 48 of them are having a problem. We've got a demographic problem here. Aging population, old people that don't want to work anymore. So then there's not enough young people to resurface them. So where's this magic land of Oz that says, oh, bring in your manufacturing and we have all these employees for you? It's nowhere.
Well, if I had to roll the dice, I'd say it, somewhere in the Phoenix area. And you're right. You're right that what's happening in Arizona is sort of an outlier compared to what's happening in the rest of the United States.
So the point that I'm trying to make here is that we have to look at the long-term trends. So the demographic trend is just as real as it's been for the last 2 years while we're talking about it. The aging population, shortage of workers. We're still in the, this era of, I'm ready to quit my job. I think there's some better terms from that in the popular press. People are ready to walk away from their jobs if they're not happy. People want to work from home. You obviously aren't going to make those sunglasses working from home, right? So how do we get people back into building factories, setting them up, and are we going to build factories or are we going to go take retail space, the unused retail space and convert it to a factory but again, if we do that, then how are we going to staff it? How are we going to get people into those in there to make it happen? I think that leads to, what we have to consider is, for the negatives, there's opportunities. Robotics are going to be more important than ever. I think robotics have been important for a long time, but we've seen more robotics in places like Germany, more robotics in China, more robotics in Japan than we have in the United States. We've been able to get by without heavy investments in those things. But Germany has been forced to, and these other countries have been forced to get into robotics. So I think if you were looking forward, again, based on our scenarios, well, we just dial down the globalization, dial up, okay, we're going to have some more plants come online. Where would they likely be? Well, I think some of them will be built from scratch, but some of them will be converted facilities. So where can you get a hold of facilities, very low cost, to come in and do a conversion? Number two, investments in robotics would probably be good. You have to say robotics, all kinds of robotics are going to be important in this labor short marketplace. So if you got an opportunity to find somebody that could retool, there might be some robotics out there that were used a decade ago that wouldn't be cutting edge state of the art for some kinds of manufacturing, but might be suitable for making eyewear like that, sunglasses. So if you're an entrepreneur, you can be saying, hey, look, It's going to be tougher to get those sunglasses in. We're going to need to find companies that make these. They might have a Polaroid stamp on them because that's what you do if they're polarized lenses. You get a Polaroid stamp on them. So, but whoever the maker is, let's find out who those companies are. Maybe we'll be talking to them about bringing some manufacturing to the U.S., making them with robotics, making them somewhere in the United States, so that they have a consistent supply that can go into your Ross stores or your or wherever it is people are shopping. Right. So that's one of the implications. We should expect more robotics. I think another thing is we've got to again revisit this whole immigration question. Right. If we don't have enough young people ready to go work in the factories, should we be bringing people in?
Yeah.
I don't quite understand it still. And I lived in Nevada for a number of years, but I know that, there's a couple of states in particular, Texas and Arizona, that are really struggle with this idea. They don't particularly welcome people coming across the southern border. But perhaps if you're someplace else, maybe you're in Utah or you're in Wisconsin or you're in Michigan or you're in another state, perhaps you could consider some way that you could say, look, we got these people crossing over the border. They're not particularly welcome in Texas, Arizona, maybe New Mexico. Could we go down there and work with Border Patrol to try to legally bring these people through, process them, put them on a bus, and bring them somewhere where we could make them more welcome?
Yeah.
We'd say, look, we need workers. We need workers to man our plants. And so would you please, they seem to have plenty of labor in Texas and Arizona. Why don't you come with us, come up to Kansas, Nebraska, wherever, that we want to put these facilities. So maybe robotics becomes an opportunity and immigration.
Yep.
Honestly, I'm a little bit startled right now with the situation in the United States that there aren't companies, not government, companies going to the government and saying, hey, we'd like to go get a big airplane. I don't know if it's a 747 or a 707 or a 767, but I'm going to get a big one. I want to take it to Poland, and I want to see if I could find 200-300 of these Ukrainian immigrants who are scared, who have no place to live, who are stuck in Poland. Could we ask them if they'd like to come to the United States?
It's ridiculous.
Because we need
people don't understand that it's all interrelated, right? It's all. We have a huge gap right now with the amount of work that we have to do and the labor to provide that work, especially skilled labor like engineers, scientists, Ukrainian science engineers. I'm sure they're there in the mix. I'm sure that we could be, if we were smart about it, like you said, go out there, grab some, offer asylum and really begin that. I read an article the other day on the brain drain happening in Russia as a result of this war. People are saying, you know what, I'm done, and they're leaving the country. They don't agree with the politics, and if they have enough money, if they're affluent enough, they're finding a way out.
Yeah. So again, these opportunities are presenting themselves. I don't see American entrepreneurs jumping on these the way that I think they could. It's one thing for Elon Musk, who I guess we could still call an entrepreneur. He sent over a whole lot of equipment to Ukraine to support their internet and their connectivity. But, I didn't see people really approaching and saying, hey, let's solve a couple of problems at the same time. Let's try to support the Ukraine, but let's support these other countries. Poland's not prepared for 2 million immigrants in 2 weeks. There's no way. These people have to be sleeping on the ground in intense and a cold weather environment. They've got to be some of them that say, listen, you want to give it a try in America? You want to come over? We don't have a lot, but we got, some churches and we got some other support structures where you can come in and get you started, put you into a shelter home, put you into a foster home type situation with a family that'll watch over you for a little while. Try to see if we can get you back to work. We've talked before about the lack of the skilled tradesmen. We lack plumbers in this country, plumbers, electricians, drywall hangers, tapers, carpenters. We desperately need those people right now. The pandemic has showed it to us. I'm sure that some of these people, so we got immigrants from the southern border coming up from Mexico and Guatemala. We got immigrants now coming into Eastern Europe. There's all kinds of work.
I know.
Right? We need waiters and waitresses and bus table people, and we're short all of those people right now.
A friend of mine owns a roofing company, and he has a 5-year backlog. 5-year backlog. So you could order a roof today, put a down payment on it, and you'll get it put into he does a lot of commercial stuff. You'll get it put onto your commercial building in the summer of, 27.
Crazy. Absolutely crazy. So, again, I think we got to realize the smart entrepreneurs out there, the leaders, are sitting down and saying, look, globalization as we knew it is not going to be for a while here, unless something dramatic happens, but it won't, because Russia's going to be Russia. Even if Putin died tomorrow, you can't just unwind this clock. You've broken trust now. You've broken trust with Moscow. You've broken trust with the neighboring Belarus and those other neighboring countries. You don't know what's going to happen there. But I think you got to turn your eyes to Asia, and the same problem. We've been concerned about what China's been doing in the South China Sea and their overtures flying over Taiwan for a decade, at least a decade. We've been concerned about it. Now is the time to really get concerned about it and really think about it. And we might have to be more proactive. We might not wait for China to put an air base on one of those islands in the South China Sea. We may go grab it for America. And if we do, that would certainly be provocative, and it would certainly cause a rift. And any rift is going to be just like what's happening now with the shutdown in Shanghai, where China can just, they're run by engineers. They can turn a plug, and all of a sudden, you're not getting your product anymore. They're not like America, where we got to fight it through and have 100 lawyers get involved. They just say, no, we're not going to do that anymore. So you're not going to get your product anymore. They could shut down Shanghai for the pandemic. They could shut down Shanghai or any town just in a trade dispute, and again, because we take over one of those islands in the South China Sea, or because we say, well, hey, if you fly another one of those low-level military jets over Taipei, we're going to intercept it. And that's all it would take. And you got a problem. So we need to be looking at our scenarios. We need to be updating these scenarios. We need to be preparing for these. And it's not just if you're already doing business in those countries. It's, who are your suppliers doing business in those countries? If you're Ross or you're a retailer and your suppliers, your product suppliers are bringing this stuff in, then are you prepared? Are you working to find alternative sources of product? And obviously, if you're making vacuum cleaners or I don't know, bags for vacuum cleaners, anything. Have you thought it through? Have you thought through this big globalization megatrend we've had for 40 years? If that stops, as it is stopping, we're going to be retrenching. Are you prepared for it? And one of the things I also like to talk about for a minute is commodities, right? I don't deal in commodities. I don't buy oil. I don't buy coal. I'm not a commodities trader. Most of us aren't. Most of us don't even own any gold or any silver or anything like that, other than jewelry. And so now what happens is we're looking at the press. So I'm now taking the same megatrend, globalization. It's dying back. And how do people react to it? And we see the price of oil went to what, $130 a barrel, right?
Yep.
They're just 2 weeks ago, $130 a barrel for oil. Now, today it was $98, so it lost 30% of its value in 2 weeks. So it goes up and it comes back down. So the question is, what am I supposed to think about commodities? Oh, by the way, today's newspaper said that coal was hitting record prices, the highest prices for coal we've ever had. And I think you have to look at that and say, okay, what is going to be the impact of globalization? So if we shut off the tap from Russia, what's the impact of natural gas and oil? Well, what happens there? Backstop supply, Saudi Arabia, rest of the Middle East, South America. What does it do? We weren't drilling for any oil a year and a half ago in Texas. I mean, we just plain quit. We had more oil than we could use, and oil was. I remember this brief time that couldn't ship it anywhere, and people were paying to take the oil off their hands back in about 6 months into the pandemic. So we go from that low point of it's worth nothing theoretically to $130 a barrel in 18 months, and now it's back to $100 a barrel. How do we think about this? And I think this is again where scenario planning comes in. We start saying, well, the mega trend would say globalization will have an impact. Let's track that. But at the same time, don't forget the basis on which these prices have traded for even longer than that, which is demand. Just straightforward demand, overall demand. What is the demand for coal, natural gas, and oil in the United States? We've run podcasts before. We hit peak oil demand before the pandemic. Before the pandemic was ever declared, going into it in 2019, we had oil companies, leaders in oil companies, people around the world and energy agencies saying, okay, we've hit peak oil demand. We've got alternative fuels. We're switching to electric cars. Internal combustion engine demand is falling off. We've hit peak oil. We're not going to need as much oil. Pandemic causes us to stop drilling oil, so we're not bringing any new oil online. We have problems with distribution, right, that we've talked about with supply chains. Now we have a war, so that's shutting off some of it. So the price gets really volatile. But I would be careful. I would sit there and say, again, if you haven't thought through your scenario, then you could say, oh, maybe it's a good time to invest in oil again. Or, maybe we're going to start seeing coal-fired electric plants come back online after 15 years of taking coal-fired plants offline, transitioning to alternative sources. and that would be wrong. I mean, what are the big trends? The big trends are less depend on fossil fuels, environmental awareness, which we spent 4 weeks covering in January, beginning of this year. We talked about all the trends in environmental awareness, and including climate awareness of climate overheating. Those trends have not gone away. In the short term, they're being eclipsed by all this discussion about what's going on in the Ukraine. But just like globalization is going away, that's a trend we can look at. We have to look at does that mean the demand for oil overall is going to go up? Not likely.
Yeah.
If anything, the reduction in globalization means that demand for these products would go down. If we pull manufacturing back into the United States and the rest of the developed world, meaning Germany, Japan, those are places that don't use fossil fuels. I mean, the people really sucking up the fossil fuels are China and India. That's where they're still in technology, their electric production, and people still burn coal in their homes for heat, coal for cooking in those places.
Yeah.
So that's where the demand has been greatest for the fossil fuels. If we stop all the importing from those countries, or we reduce the importing from those countries, then what happens is demand for fossil fuels will continue to decline. Demand on the United States will grow. Are we going to go back and lift up a bunch of regulations to make it easier for people to use fossil
Likely
fuels?
not,
That's
no.
not going to happen. So what we'll see is an acceleration. Yeah, we'll see an acceleration of sustainables, right? So the trend that's there, like I always say, the disruption leads to an acceleration of trends. We're going to have this disruption. In the short term, you see this, but long term, it will cause an acceleration of the trend. So again, just another example of where it's so important to have our eyeballs firmly affixed on our scenarios and keep them updated, and not just create a scenario, put it in the cabinet, and forget about it, and not try to keep yourself aware.
That's a very common thing that we see at Spark Partners as we talk to these business owners that do these strategic plans, and they really a lot of these look backwards in the rearview mirror, and they're not doing the weekly or even monthly scenario planning and readjustments to what's happening in their business. It's remarkable. I think when I first met you, Adam, you had told me about one of the big 5 accounting firms. You went in there, they spent a couple $1 million on a big strategy, then they put it into a beautiful leather-bound book and put it on the shelf and walked away.
Happens all too often. The other thing we can think about through this is there's going to be a change in terms of how countries behave and some of the internal politics of countries. So the big exporting countries of the world, China, India, Brazil, Germany, Japan. These are countries that their economy was based on exports. Okay, as you said, there would be the Chinese, the 6, 7, 8% per year growth for 2-3 decades was mostly products coming to the United States. We drove that. At the same time, post-World War II, we were the big buyers of the products that came out of Japan and the whole Japanese economic revolution and how well the Japanese economy did. It's been stagnant for a while, but still heavily reliant on exports. Same thing in Germany, heavily reliant on exports. So now that we're saying, look, trust is going down, concerns are going up, globalization is going to be reduced, we start saying, well, what's going to happen when those economies slow? It's one thing for China to be able to say, well, I'm going to, pull the trigger and we're not going to ship you parts, or, however we're going to behave in China. It's easy to do when your economy's growing at 6% a year. But if we start seeing European countries, American countries say, you know what, we're going to bring some of this stuff back in-house, we're going to, stay in our own country, and the growth rate in China drops to 1-2%. That's going to make it a lot tougher on those leaders, right? Then how are they going to behave? Will that, prod them to open up their borders, or will that prod them to be more difficult? Act more like Putin's been acting, one way or another. Let's think about that. The same thing in India. India went all nationalism in the elections here a while back, and they've been all about Indian pride. Well, easy to be that way when you're exporting all kinds of intellectual capital. You're putting a lot of software code and things out the door. But if globalization drops off, people don't trust your code. They think that perhaps Russian spies could be in your country and could plant bad eggs inside of your software code. Then if your growth slows and you're India and you've got a lot of people, 1.5 billion people at least over there, then what happens next? Are they going to be able to continue to be this great India growth engine that they've been for 2 decades? If that slows, what's going to happen with leadership there? And how will that impact them on the global stage? Will they get closer to Moscow, for example? which they've been discussion already. What's India going to do? They're neighbors practically, and they've had a long history of trade back and forth. Are they going to continue to say, yeah, I'm not going to trade with Russia because I don't like the Ukraine? Or are they likely to say, you know what? We definitely got to do something to keep the lights on. So you know what? We're going to start supplying the Soviet. We're going to start supplying the Russians with things.
Yeah.
So these are things that I think, again, our listeners need to be planning into their scenarios.
We hear about these companies and corporations and others that are not doing business in Russia anymore. Like McDonald's suspended all of their stores, and we hear about these things, we read about these things. But what's interesting is that right now, these things are almost like a token ploy. Like, we're, solidarity, blah, blah, blah. But where does solidarity stop when the need starts, right? I mean, you can see your example with India. And, right now, solidarity 101, absolutely, rah, rah, rah. But at some point in time, they're going to need fuel to power their economic engine. And they may not be getting the best deal with the Saudis, so they're going to have to reach across that aisle and work with the Russians again. It's just interesting to see what's going to play out in the next 2-3 months here.
Well, I saw a little article in the New York Times that a fellow named Christopher Wynn apparently controls 190 pizza operations. I think it was Papa John's. I hope I got that right. Pizza operations. He's control of franchises in Russia. He has 190 sites in Russia, and he's got them open. He said he's not planning to close those pizza sites. So here you have a business person saying, look, I got these sites in Russia. He doesn't see a connection between that and the Ukraine. He sees a bunch of Russian people that are eating pizza. He says they're going to go hungry if he doesn't feed them. So consequently, he's going to keep his restaurants open. So if McDonald's closes their restaurants and some other people close their restaurants, he sits there and says, wow, this is an opportunity. I can grow my business. I can take on more of these customers. Was that what he's going to do? He's American. He might get pressured. He might even legally be forced to sell those franchises. But then, look at that. So the government says, listen, you can't do that. We're not allowing business in Russia. And he's going to throw up his hands and say, well, okay, fine, then I'll sell them. Who's going to buy them? Some guy from China. Some guy from Brazil, right? Somebody out there is going to come in, maybe from the Philippines, and say, okay, sure, I'll buy your 190 franchises. I'm going to keep them open because I'm not American. I don't have to live by those American rules. And so I'll see what happens. And then he reaps in those benefits. And then the McDonald's, I don't know their structure there, but they've got to have some franchisees or some of these other companies. Coca-Cola's got bottling plants in those countries. Are they just going to turn those over to people in Belarus, or what's going to happen to those assets? It's, as you said, you can't just look at the short term. It's easy for people to, as you said, jump on the bandwagon today. But will they stay that way as time goes along? And what impact will this have on the world order and on the business order? What we do know is that if Coca-Cola and McDonald's had not, in their scenario planning, been prepared for the Russians to invade the Ukrainians, shame on them. I mean, I know most of our audience is small companies, it's mid-sized companies, it's people that struggle. Is it worthwhile for me to do this level of planning? But certainly they surely must have people doing scenario plans all over the world. And if they didn't, then shame on them. And I guess they deserve to lose money. They deserve to lose those stranded assets because they should have had this. They should have had this in mind years ago. When the Russians invaded Cyprus, when the Russians made the foray trying to take over Ukraine, I think it was 2014, they should have been preparing for this. The fact that it sounds like they really weren't, and they're reacting to the situation is
for sure.
Really
and
disappointing.
These multinational companies, it really behooves them to have people on staff that are watching these things constantly. But even for our small business owners and our medium-sized business owners that are out there with the global supply chain, I mean, we talked about this example of these glasses that, I know companies in Phoenix that are injection molding companies, but they get their raw materials from, guess what? Overseas, from China in particular. So it's all together. It's all tied together. You turn the spigot off in one area and it's going to, suffer in another area. And this is a great segue, Adam, to talk about our course, Think Innovation. It's really a way to restructure and think about how you do scenario planning. We actually have a couple lessons in there that discuss scenario planning. And it's boots on the ground, pencil to paper, real active way of learning how to scenario plan. So I recommend everybody go to our website, sparkpointers.com, take a look at the course. We'd be happy to correspond with you if you have any questions in looking at what it takes to really map out your company in the direction of not only where these trends are going, but these other things that come in, like these disruptions, like you talked about in the past, Adam, how they accelerate the trends, and how much are we seeing now due to the 1-2 punch of the pandemic and the Central European conflict?
Yeah, I mean, people have been asking, Adam, what do you think about this or that for 30 years? And for the last 15, certainly, I've been the person out there with Forbes and a lot of magazines and have written a lot of articles about what are the implications. Now we're doing it on our podcast. But what I am happy about is to say that when you tied me down at the beginning of the pandemic and you said, Adam, let's take the time now when you can't travel to put together a tool set to help people. I was really happy to do that with you, and that tool set is now out there for people. And it doesn't cost that much money to go buy that class, and then you can really sit down and fill out the exercises. So instead of just listening to me for 30 minutes and listen to Manny for 30 minutes and saying, oh, that was an interesting thought, you can go back and actually do what we're telling you to do, which is think through your plans, think through your requirements, build your scenarios, and be ready for the future. Be ready to grow. If you don't have that tool set, I think it is hard. So
very good, Adam. Well, thank you for your time, Adam, and certainly looking forward to the next time we're able to chat. With that, I'll talk to you later.